honor to welcome you to this Age of Rights rally that's focused on the intersection of older age, human rights, and dementia. The topic is deeply personal. My paternal grandfather lived with dementia, and now my mother does as well. Supporting her brings me both unsettling moments and hope. Unsettling to witness the changes, and hopeful to see that within her, that she continued to have meaningful experiences and small victories. Her journey reflects a broader reality about all older people, that vulnerability and potential indeed exist side by side. By identifying the human rights principles that matter most to older people with dementia, we're helping to shape a future where all older persons age with rights, dignity, and self-determination. Today's cross-regional, cross-sector dialogue centered on the voices of older persons models the approach that we need to draft a UN Convention on the Rights of Older Persons. Our panel brings older persons with dementia, care partner, NGOs, medical and aging experts, human rights practitioner, and you, our rally participants from around the world, and together we will service the human rights principles that matter the most. Our 90-minute program is as follows. We will begin with keynote reflections from two global organizations to set the stage. From there, we go directly to older and soon-to-be older persons to share their lived experiences. We then hear from those who support and work alongside older persons with dementia, their caregiver, NGOs, medical and aging experts, and human rights practitioner. From there, we move into the discussion segment of our program. First, with our panelists, and then with you, our participants. To support focus and accessibility, please keep your video off and audio mute. This helps reduce distractions, and particularly for participants living with dementia, so kindly turn your video off. Osnat Litzwick from Pasadena Network is our Zoom tech host today. She will help support the technical flow of our session. We welcome you to pop your name into the greetings and any reflections that you have along the way into the chat box. So Carla, if I can have your help to turn off your video, that'd be really great. Thank you so much. Okay, and now we'll begin with our keynote speakers. First, we'll hear from a video message from Natasha Todorovich, the steering group member of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Older People, an alliance of more than 400 organizations. Natasha is a psychologist and public health expert whose work focuses on long-term care, elder abuse prevention, the rights and the well-being of older persons. Her full bio, as well as the full bio of our other speakers today, is available in our agenda document, and Osnat will also help to pop it into the chat. And Osnat, over to you whenever you're ready with the video message from Natasha. Thank you.
Gentlemen, first, I want to acknowledge the organizers for bringing us together for the Age with Rights rally. My name is Natasha Todorovich, speaking on behalf of GAROP, the Global Alliance of the Rights of Older People. And the question at the heart of today's event, who decide, is exactly what this new convention must answer. On 3rd of April last year, a historical decision was taken at the United Nations. After years of advocacy through the open-ended working group, governments agreed to establish an intergovernmental working group to draft UN Convention on the Rights of Older Persons, moving from debate to action. The Intergovernmental Working Group will meet for the first time from 18 to 20 February. That is why this moment matters. This event takes place during Garup Age with Rights Global Rally, a global mobilization calling on governments to engage actively and to ensure the full and equal participation of older persons and civil society. Because a convention about older people must be built with older people. For older persons living with dementia, this is especially important. Too often, decisions are made about them rather than with them. Dementia becomes a reason to remove choice instead of providing support. A human rights framework can change that. At this early stage, GARP is focusing on the Convention's foundation, beginning with general principles that guide everything that follows. Let me highlight two. First, full, meaningful, and equal participation and inclusion in society, recognizing older persons as rights holders whose voice must be heard. Second, respect for dignity, autonomy, and independency, including the freedom to make one's own decision with appropriate support. For people living with dementia, this means moving from substitution to support and from control to agency. For me, this is also personal. As I support my mother through dementia, I am reminded that even when memory fades, dignity and the need for choice remain. As we approach the first Intergovernmental Working Group meeting, this is the time to act. We call on governments to engage seriously in the process, and I encourage you to join the Age with Rights campaign and help shape a strong convention for older people everywhere. And thank you very much.
Natasha. Thank you, Natasha. That's really great. Now I'd like to invite to the floor our keynote from Alzheimer's Disease International, DY Suharia. DY is the Regional Director of Alzheimer's Disease International, Asia Pacific region, and also the founder of Alzheimer's Indonesia. She brings a multidisciplinary career that bridges public health, communications, and nonprofit leadership to advance dementia awareness, care, and advocacy. DY, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, everyone, for attending this very important webinar. I'm speaking on behalf of Alzheimer's Disease International, a federation of more than 100 associations, civil society. I see a few of our members here as well, and our champion, Emily Ong, and Renu and Nilanjana from Artsy India here. It's a pleasure to be here with you today and have this opportunity to talk about a cause that is close to my heart because I took care of my mom for 10 years before she passed away in 2017. Dementia is everybody's business. And this Age with Rights rally, next slide, please. This Age with Rights rally keynote speech that I prepared with my colleagues in London is something that we believe that with every one of you here, we can really, really influence the direction of how we want people living with dementia to be treated. These are all of our partners that basically have been hand in hand together with us. We are engaging, drafting the process, especially through GAROP and the UN NGO Committee on Aging. There's all these partners that are basically aligned with us in believing the power of participation, the power of partnership in improving quality of life of people with dementia. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, dementia is everybody's business. It's an issue of equity where the condition intersects with stigma, with gender, with autonomy, discrimination, participation, and so many other social aspects. Next slide. in, I think, around a decade ago. Next slide, please. The Alzheimer's Disease International produced a report, key principles on dementia-friendly communities. Could you go back to the previous slide, please? The previous slide, the one with the report. 2 slides before this, please. So I was saying that in 2016, Alzheimer's Disease International produced this report, the key principles of dementia-friendly community. But through time, we actually mention it as a dementia-inclusive society. Can you go back to the slide after the one you just now showed, please? Dementia-inclusive society with the principles of putting communities play a significant part in the journey of people living with dementia. Next slide, please. The one that with the report in the slide after this. Yes, please stay here for a while. So people living with dementia is the center of all the work we're doing. The component of organizations, partnerships, and communities are all aligned in supporting people live with dementia. And the principles are based on the panel principles that is actually in the slide as well. It's before this. Under the panels, yes, so the key principles of participation, active involvement, research and policy, accountability, non-discrimination and equality, empowerment, and legality. There is power in dementia's recognition as an NCD. Recently, in September 2025, Alzheimer's Disease International were officially recognized as dementia is recognized as a non-communicable disease within the political declaration of the 4th high-level meeting on the prevention and control of NCDs and mental health at the UN General Assembly. Can you next slide, please? And this distinction comes at a pivotal moment for health policy, underscoring the urgent needs for governments and policymakers to effectively integrate dementia into broader NCD strategies. Dementia is estimated to become the 3rd leading cause of death globally by 2040, and among the top 10 causes of death in 166 countries. This recognition of dementia is definitely in the declaration comes at a very critical moment, underscoring the urgent need for everyone to effectively integrate dementia. Next slide. The Global Action Plan on the Public Health Response to Dementia focus on dementia as a public health priority. And the United Nations Convention of the Rights of Older Persons would do the following for older persons with dementia. A, target existing gaps in protection by shifting care models from paternalistic welfare to a human rights-based approach. And the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, or CRPD, is often inadequate for older persons with dementia because it fails to address the unique, progressive nature of cognitive decline, widespread ageism, and the specific need for specialized person-centered care. Next slide. An example that I can share of Scotland, for instance, national dementia plans that have been developed using a based approach. Their current 10-year strategy, Everyone's Story, 2023-2033, uses the panel principles that I shared earlier: participation, accountability, non-discrimination, empowerment, legality as the basis for the plan. And it aims to combat stigma, ensure equitable care access, and uphold human rights for those living with dementia throughout their journey with the dementia continuum. We can clearly see how critical the UN Convention on the Rights of Older Persons will be to our peers living with dementia, their families, and carers. The realization of the rights and principles included in this convention are long overdue, and we have the ability to bridge the huge gap in protection and rights afforded to older people with the current system. As you can see here, this is a slide, a person living with dementia at the center in all aspects of participation and decision-making, access to justice, rights to life, education, freedom from torture or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. You can see in the slides. What this convention symbolizes, the UN Convention on the Rights of Older Persons, is a sense of hope for older people, including those living with conditions like dementia. It's important that we all work together, and I hope that this rally allows everyone the opportunity to partake in thoughtful and meaningful discussions, ideas, and knowledge exchange together with our joint expertise and knowledge in many areas. We all have the opportunity to push forward not only dementia's progress, but progress for older persons around the world. Thank you. Over to you, Margaret.
Thank you, DY. Thank you to both of our keynote speaker. Yeah, you've helped us set the stage by grounding us in where we've come from and why identifying the human rights principle that matter to older persons with dementia is essential as we begin to draft a UN Convention on the Rights of Older Persons. I just want to take a brief moment to thank you for the additional participants who've come on in the last while. It's really great to see you from different parts of the world. Feel free to pop in your greetings or name who you are, your organization. And I also ask that if we can continue to keep the cameras and audio off, please, so that we can focus on the panelists as they speak. That would be really helpful. Okay, I would, yeah, so, sorry, I believe it's Kanaka? Sorry, I'm trying to, yeah, so I'll help you turn off your video, okay? Perfect. So at this time, I invite two inspiring individuals to share their lived experience with dementia. First, we have Emily Ong. Emily is a lived experience advocate who has been a leading voice in dementia awareness and rights in Asia and globally since her diagnosis with young onset dementia. She contributes to global policy and outreach, helping shape more inclusive and responsive dementia care. Once again, you'll find Emily's full bio in the chat box. And Emily, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Wow. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are joining from. Thank you, Margaret, for having me in this important dialogue concerning the rights of older persons living with dementia. When I was diagnosed in 2017 with cognitive decline, I was entering my 50s. Even at that age, my greatest fear is losing my autonomy and independence in life participation and the rights to social inclusion. Other than mental health issues, dementia is one medical condition where violations of human rights are happening in everyday lives, not just at macro level. For example, a poorly designed environment that creates confusion, anxiety, and triggers agitations in people living with dementia, whether be it at home, a care center, or a long-term care institution. The harm experienced by older persons is often not recognized as harm. Instead, they are blamed for making life difficult for others who are caring for them. This was what I witnessed most when supporting people living with dementia. I'll be turning 60 next year, and I do have my concern because it is going to be tougher to live with progressive cognitive decline as one gets older. When I compare myself now to when I was newly diagnosed at the age of 50, I noticed that cognitive fatigue I experience every day is taking a greater toll on my stamina and well-being. For example, I find it harder to concentrate on conversation or complete the tasks that used to be much easier for me a few years ago. Coupled with age-related issues like low visual acuity and my increasing difficulty with words finding and my need to have softer texture food, I foresee that navigating my life as an older person with cognitive decline will be an uphill battle. This is further compounded by the low priority given to the rights and needs of older persons with dementia in the national and global agenda. How many long-term care or healthcare providers practice a human right-based approach as mentioned in the panel just now by D.Y. Suhaya when delivering care to people with dementia? My consent for cataract surgery in the operating theater was not recognized because of my medical diagnosis of cognitive impairment stroke dementia. This is a violation of human rights because under the Mental Capacity Act, which Singapore has, a lack of capacity cannot be established merely by reference to a person's age or appearance or a condition of the person. The lack of systemic change that relies on outdated knowledge and models of care, which fail to address the complex, evolving, and highly individual nature of the disease, is a threat to the rights of older persons with dementia. My aspiration is that older persons with dementia have the right to enjoy human rights as full human beings and should not be taken away or reduced because of their cognitive decline in age. They should be treated as capable individuals within their own capacity and participate fully in meaningful living as a person and a member of a society, such as engaging in occupation, research, or community activities. Civil society groups like National Dementia Association and Healthy Aging Institution, for example, must ensure the rights of older persons with dementia are embedded in their advocacy work and program delivery. Without clear protections for older persons with dementia, they will be denied equitable accommodations or dismissed by authorities, resulting in continued stigmas and discrimination and a lack of access to justice. Thank you for your attention. Pass it back to you, Margaret.
Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you so much for your generosity in sharing. So next we would like to invite Jim Mann from Canada. Jim has championed the meaningful and ethical engagement of people living with dementia since his Alzheimer's diagnosis in 2007. Widely recognized for countering stigma and advancing inclusion, Jim has helped to shape Canada's national dementia strategy through his advisory roles. His leadership and impact were honored with an honorary Doctor of Laws degree. Jim, over to you.
Thank you, Margaret. And thank you, Emily. Hello, everyone. I am coming up on 19 years of living, and I emphasize living with dementia. If I'm honest, I am living my best life with Alzheimer's, and that's in part thanks to my mother. She helped me identify and find my purpose through her experiences living with Alzheimer's, and especially when she lived in independent living. I learned about and saw the stigma of dementia. I saw people's reluctance to engage with her. And one day at the end of their lunch, I approached her table and my mother was not there. Where was she? Her now former seatmates pointed to a corner table and said she had been moved to the corner table where she sat alone. Reducing the stigma of dementia was born from her experiences. I've made many presentations over the years, and in my first in late 2008, I said, and I quote, "Only by speaking out can we educate, and by educating, we increase awareness of Alzheimer's and related dementias. We spread the net of awareness of living with dementia. We know the story, but others don't. And if we do not tell the story, our story, who will?" End quote. And 18 years later, I still believe this. And that is how we can make a difference. And that is how we can change the conversation. To advocate is to educate, not only to tell our story, but to tell others who we were, but more importantly, who we are today, to tell our hopes and dreams and our expectations. And the experience of an acquaintance of mine illustrates the need very well. He was a longtime member of a golf club, used to run men's night, and a person regularly consulted on club rules. Following disclosure of his Alzheimer's diagnosis, he said members stopped asking about a rule and took away his role organizing men's night. It's so obvious, he said, that people are assuming incapability. The decision to sideline him was immediate. The day before club members were told of his diagnosis, he obviously was considered capable. Simply based on being told of his Alzheimer's, he was deemed to be incapable. No one talked to him. No one asked how he was doing. They immediately assumed and went with the stereotypical stigmatized image. And that is why many people are not forthcoming about the fact that they are living with a diagnosis of dementia, because they are confident that they will be judged as incapable and frail. And that is why we have to change the conversation. And I think we are, slowly. And yes, perhaps at the speed of a snail. But I believe awareness and attitudes of living with dementia are changing. Our collective voices, in my opinion, are being heard and having an impact. When I am out and about, I wear a lanyard with the Alzheimer's Society's card, "Please be patient, I have Alzheimer's." I wear it for two reasons. One, to clear up any misunderstanding there might be when I'm standing at a counter with a blank look, suggesting I don't know where I am or why. I also want people to see a person with dementia in the community. I want them to understand I can pick my own apples and converse with the employees. I can also lose my way. I can be disoriented. If people can see and hear us, stigma is potentially reduced. We will be just another shopper. I believe in the 6 degrees of separation, that one person I educate will reflect and then talk to others about their newfound information and my reality. Perhaps those at today's rally will talk to others about what they have heard from us. I have been a knowledge user and co-principal investigator on 28 research projects. I'm a published author in peer-reviewed papers, and I have delivered hundreds of presentations. One was to a split grade 3, grade 4 class about living with dementia, which is part of a research project I'm on. And that was 45 minutes of fun. I was involved in the development of Canada's National Dementia Strategy as a member of the Ministerial Advisory Board on Dementia, and I co-wrote a book chapter highlighting unconscious bias. And I focus on ethics and consent through, for example, my membership on the Advisory Board of Research Ethics BC. And this past Thursday, our project's paper entitled "Consent and Meaningful Inclusion of People Living with Dementia, Insights from Canadian Dementia Researchers" was published. And that is how I'm trying to change the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jim, for your sharing. Your voice certainly is heard, along with Emily's around personhood and speaking up. And thank you so much for doing that to help us understand better. Next, we're going to go to organizations that work with older persons in dementia. But before that, I just wanted to share that my colleagues and I in Africa had hoped to include an older African person living with dementia in our discussion today. But unfortunately, that wasn't possible, in part because dementia is often diagnosed at a later stage in Africa, which then prevents individuals from participating in today's session. But however, we do have the voice of a caregiver an African family caregiver, someone who lives that reality very closely. So what we're going to do next is play a recorded video from caregiver Margaret Munyora, who's actually from Kenya, to talk about her experience supporting her mother with dementia. So I'll turn it over to Osna to help us play that video. Thank you.
Namwambia hawa ni watoto mama. Anasahau kabisa na vituko, karakta hii. Mimi naitwa Margaret Kivia Mnyao. Naishi na mama yangu na watoto wangu. Naishi Kayole. Mimi ni caregiver wa mama yangu. Alinjipata ngoja inaitwa Dementia. Sasa tulinjuanga mama tulikuwa tunashindwa mama shida ni nini kuanzia 2017. Alienda kuficha pesa kwa shamba la wenyewe. Sasa watu wakasema alikuwa ameenda kuroga huko. Sasa walikuwa wamuue lakini hawakumuua, chifu akakuja wakamsaidia. Nilimpeleka hospitali akapimwa magonjwa. Lakini ile ugonjwa walisema ako nayo, walisema tu ako na nisahau hiyo ugonjwa walisema ako nayo. Na tukafuatilia tukapata hakuna ugonjwa, walifanya tu walikosa ugonjwa wakasema tu ako na hiyo ugonjwa. Sasa hapo ndipo mama alianza tu hivi behavior mpaka dakika ya mwisho, mpaka saa hii vile yako. Sasa tungejua mapema hii ugonjwa angeitwa mchawi, kila mtu angekuwa anajua hii ni ugonjwa. Tumefunzwa bila tunavaa kuishi nao, bila kuwapea stress, bila kuwaongelelea na sauti, na hawataki sauti kubwa. Kama mama yangu kitu ya kwanza nikimuongelesha na sauti kubwa ni hivyo. Imeisha hivyo. Hatutakaa na amani. Serikali naweza tamani sana itutafutie dawa, vile nilisikia hii ugonjwa haina dawa. Tutafutie tu dawa, watu wanateseka, watu wanatutesa. Watafute tu dawa, tuwe tunaendeanga dawa kama watu wagonjwa ukimwi vile wanaendea, pia watu wa dementia waendeange hivyo.
Thank you to Margaret, who actually helped us, as I listen, highlight some of the unique situations or within Africa. So I think it will be interesting as we continue our conversation to hear what regional commonalities there might be relative to dementia principles and where some of the nuances might be. So next we'll go to individuals or organizations that support older persons with dementia. And then what I'd like to do is invite DY back to the floor to share from the Asia Pacific region. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. From the Alzheimer's Disease International Asia Pacific region, overseeing almost 20 countries in the region. And based on what I shared earlier, based on the panel principles, I think that's something that we always try to implement, that based on participation, accountability, non-discrimination, empowerment, legality. Examples are actually shared by Emily, one of the speaker here, who actually led this production of the first ever ebook on Voices of Asia, involving 20 stories from 13 countries. Person with dementia and family carers are all involved in that production, and it's aligned with these principles. There's also the movement of the Camino de Santiago de Compostela walk with the Global Brain Health Initiative involving persons with dementia. after diagnosis, there's so many things that they can contribute, and they participate and become an inspiration. So these are some of the examples. There's all these examples in India as well on the dementia-friendly initiatives, dementia friends involving youth, and involving people living with dementia as well. So we, as a civil society, we always put person with dementia at the center. We always embrace all the organizations that work in the same cause. And we believe aligning with the panel principles is the way to go on this. Thank you, Margaret. Over to you.
Thank you, DY, for sharing. Yes, the panel principle help us see very clearly what we need to do in terms of working with and for older persons with dementia. So next, I'd like to invite to the floor our speaker, Monica Kinajuran, who is from Kenya. Monica is the founder and CEO of Women for Dementia Africa, where she advocates for dignity, inclusion, and better care for persons living with dementia, especially women. She contributes to multiple research, policy, and advisory platforms advancing dementia awareness and care. So over to you, Monica. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you. And thank you for sharing one of my colleagues in this space of dementia. Incidentally, her mother passed away last week. So thank you for including us in this rally. And as everyone has shared, dementia is very personal to me. I've been affected for more than 20 years. Mom died 19 years ago this year. Currently, I'm caring for our dad who has dementia. And that's the work I've been, and therefore we ended up setting up Women for Dementia, which is like 7 years old. And I said, thank you again. I'm very glad to be part of the Global Right for UN Convention, the Rights of Older Person, and glad to represent a Kenyan, which represents all of Africa's voice. From my work, dementia clearly exposes where the human rights of older persons are most at risk. Dementia becomes a human rights concern when an older person begins to lose voice, visibility, protection, participation, and everyday choice, often long before any legal incapacity is recognized. So when we ask, who decides for these people? We are really asking how decisions can uphold dignity, inclusion, participation, and safety as people age, including when cognitive abilities change. What I want to do from my everyday human rights problem to the principles, to the principle a UN convention must protect, especially for older persons living with dementia. Firstly, dignity and supported decision-making. Too often, when once an older person shows signs of dementia, they are treated as though they lost all capacity, as Jim had shared about that friend of his at the club. Decisions are made for them, not with them, but dignity means recognizing that capacity is not or nothing. I think a colleague also shared that phrase here. Even when support is needed, older person living in dementia retain preference, emotions, and the right to participate in decisions that affect their everyday lives. A convention must protect supported decision making, not replace people's voices with assumptions. Secondly, non-discrimination and inclusion. Stigma and misconception around dementia often push older persons to the margins of family and community life, and in some contexts, like what Margaret in the video was sharing, the symptoms of dementia are misinterpreted as signs of witchcraft or evil possession. In Kenya, I've encountered cases where older persons showing symptoms of dementia were accused of witchcraft and even murdered. These deaths were driven by fear and misconception because they are not informed. But where community understand dementia, these fears dissolve, and older persons are supported and kept within the community. So the work we do at Women for Dementia is sensitizing, informing, and empowering the community to understand this is a disease like any other disease. Inclusion means older persons living dementia remain visible, valued, and able to participate in everyday life. Thirdly, my third point, protection and safe living environment. Where dementia is poorly understood in this part of Africa or this part of the world, older persons may be exposed to neglect, unsafe condition, restraint, or even abuse. As people age, vulnerability can increase, and without safeguard, the risk of harm grows. And this is double for those who are living with dementia. Violence against older persons accused of witchcraft, including burning, like the case I've shared, is the opposite of safe living environment. These acts represent extreme human rights violation and clear failure to protect the right to life, dignity, and security. Where communities understand older persons are protected and rather than attacked, understanding replaces fear and safety becomes possible. This is the desire we would love to have for Africa, where you're not being accused to have witchcraft. A convention must uphold the right of older person to protection from harm and to live in a safe, supportive environment, even if they have dementia. Fourthly, shared responsibility and support for caregivers. This is what WFDA is so passionate about, because caregiving after late diagnosis turns to the family. Caregiving for older persons living in dementia often falls almost entirely on the family and mostly on women. Without support, caregivers face burnout, emotional strain, and economic insecurity. Care must be a shared responsibility. Caregivers too are rights holders who require recognition and support. So this brings me to the motto of WFDA, which is dignity for all, women at the heart. Women experience dementia on both sides as caregiver, and I think I saw on the screen about the prevalence in India. It's also women are more affected. And I think this is a global issue, and women take up the role of caregiving as caregivers and as older persons living themselves. Any rights framework must recognize how age, gender, and cognitive decline intersect to increase vulnerability and risk. I want to close with an African reflection. This is Ubuntu. From an African lens, dignity is collective. Ubuntu teaches us that humanity is shaped through one another. When an older person is excluded, silenced, or harmed, the whole community loses something of its humanity. And that's what happens when we have these cases of lynching of people living in dementia. So when we ask who decides, we are really asking how we protect the dignity, inclusion, participation, and shared responsibility of older persons living with dementia as we all age together. Thank you. Over to you, Margaret.
Thank you very much, Monica. What you share has definitely some common themes with what DY share, but what was interesting that popped up for me, which I wasn't as aware before, is the whole notion of safety within that has a definition in terms of the culture and the witchcraft that happens in Africa. And thank you for bringing up the discussion among the caregiver. I think it's something that we will probably hear more from on later on, but this is really great. So thank you for that, Monica. Now we move to our final set of speakers who bring system expertise or system level expertise relative to older person with dementia. First, I'll invite to the floor Dr. Debanjan Banerjee. Debanjan is a consultant geriatric psychiatrist at Apollo Multi-Specialty Hospitals in Kolkata, with expertise in dementia care and older age mental health. As a clinician, researcher, and advocate, he works to advance person-centered care and strengthen community and policy responses to aging and dementia. Over to you, Debanjan.
Yeah, thank you, Margaret, and greetings to everyone present here for championing the human rights cause. Thank you for having me here once again. Now, as I speak here, I have seen from both sides of the table. I work in this field, and I have my father, a very renowned professor of economics, who presently suffers from dementia, and me and my mom are the main caregivers. So just before coming here, I was actually with him, which kind of motivates me further to be here. Now, let me give you an example. A 78-year-old woman with early dementia lives in a joint family in Eastern India. She can clearly express her preferences. She wants to continue taking part in daily prayers, dislikes certain medications. She doesn't like the taste because they make her drowsy, and she prefers to stay in her own room, sticking to her hobbies at certain times. Yet, since the diagnosis has been made, decisions shift very quietly to her children. Medications are changed without discussion, given surreptitiously in food and drinks. Social activities are restricted for safety, and her objections are dismissed as symptoms. Clinically, she still has capacity for many everyday decisions. What she loses is not ability, but permission. This is where rights matter. Presuming capacity, enabling participation, protection without over-restricting, and recognizing family support, as many of you said, without replacing the person's voice. And that is what a rights-based convention must safeguard. But you know, any convention will fail if it is not, just themed in the socio-cultural background and, socio-cultural context. So one of the thing is in India, as I speak from India, this principles of human rights, and I had this discussion with Margaret several times before. I work with the Alzheimer's Related Disorders Society of India, the Kolkata chapter. I think the secretary of our chapter is here, Ms. Nilanjana, and also with the ASEM Global Aging Center. So this has been a recurring discussion in all of our discourses that human rights are actually shaped in India by family-centric caregiving models, very rapid socio-economic divide, and cultural notions of duty rather than autonomy. Why? Because in India, caregiving is often framed as a moral obligation rather than choice. Well, this can be protective. It ensures care continuity, but it also risks silencing the person with dementia, which we don't want, as decisions are frequently made to quote in their best interest, but without their participation. This makes presumption of capacity and supported decision-making especially critical in our context. And this, coupled with stigma and delayed help seeking, is something that the Convention and any principle of human rights should target. Now, as a clinician, looking at it from a clinical point of view and also as a caregiver myself, I would like to kind of conceptualize or think of the principles of human rights in such cases as four important pillars. One, presumption of capacity, not a diagnosis-based exclusion. You know, in India, in our country, once a person is labeled as having dementia, families often say, well, doctor will now decide. This is not always malicious. It comes from love, fear, and a deep cultural belief that elders should be protected from distress no matter what. But the effect is an immediate erasure of voice. A convention, therefore, needs to clearly state that capacity is not lost because of diagnosis, and that supported decision-making is not just a fantasy or a luxury, but a safeguard against a well-intentioned silencing. Second, right to meaningful participation in everyday decisions. Participation here does not mean that a person will wander away from home. Yet, It means being included in one's own life, deciding what color dress I want to wear, what food I want, whether I want less salt or more sugar. Of course, keeping in health restrictions, but also what color painting I would prefer in my rooms, which is often not discussed with them. Third, protection from harm without erasing autonomy. India is highly risk averse when it comes to aging. Families fear falls, wandering, social embarrassment, and most of the cares of older individuals, they are inside their homes. And as I work with the International Psychogeriatric Association, we have also published a position statement on how terms matter, how calling a person with dementia is different from telling individuals who are living with dementia. And these terms need to be ingrained in our day-to-day clinical care as well. And we do conduct workshops for early career clinicians on how their idea about individuals with dementia gets shaped. So a rights-based convention must clearly state that protection should not become quite imprisonment, that dignity itself is a form of safety, because one of the silent killers in older individuals is suicide, and that comes from risk of losing dignity, and older individuals with dementia are at high risk. The last and the final pillar of this principle of human rights would be relational autonomy. Autonomy in our country is rarely individual. So the convention must acknowledge caregivers as partners, not an imposing authority, and insist that rights always remain with the person living with dementia. It is not transferred away for our convenience. And hence, whenever I think that my dad is giving me a very hard time, sometimes I fail to realize, even with my education in this field, that it is he who is having a hard time, not me. I would end by mentioning this, that if the convention that we are talking about, treats dementia only through a medical lens, it will fail. If it treats rights as abstract ideals in the sky, it will fail. But if it recognizes dementia as a lived, relational, and cultural experience, not shifting away the rights from the hands of the patient, the person who is living with dementia, where dignity can be lost quietly, this convention and all of your support, it will become into that solid document that protects voices precisely when they begin to fade. That would be all from my side. Over to you, Margaret. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Devanjan. As you were speaking, I'm just reflecting. Are you really a doctor? In the sense that you speak very full-heartedly with plain kind of conversational language and stories to help us understand. So that's really wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you. Now I'd like to invite to the floor Dr. Yongji Yong. Yongji is the technical lead for the Aging and Health Program at WHO Europe, supporting member states to advance healthy aging through policy, advocacy, and capacity building. He holds a PhD in gerontology and brings experience from both WHO and the Government of Canada in shaping aging policy. The floor is yours, Yongji. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Margaret. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for attending this global rally. It is such an important meeting and an important precursor to next week's Intergovernmental Working Group to begin drafting the Conventions of the Rights of Older Persons. And I'm so happy to be part of this esteemed panels of speakers, and particularly to Jim, Emily, and Margaret for sharing your personal experience, which are very important in raising the awareness. I think for the conventions to be truly protective of the rights of older persons, not just older persons of today, but older persons of the future, we have to confront one of the difficult and challenging truths. And this truth is that ageism remains, and it still remains, deeply entrenched and embedded in our society and also in our health and care system. The very system that are meant to support us when we need the care the most. And for people with lived experience, this is often compounded by stigma, as Jim mentioned, disabilities and gender inequalities that leave many people invisible and unheard. So I believe, from the perspective of older persons with lived experience of dementia, there are three principles that we need to consider, especially for next week. First is that dignity, personhood, and autonomy must be non-negotiable. A dementia diagnosis should never take away who a person is. People still have values, relationship, and the right to be involved to making decisions about their life. And our health and care system should support people with lived experience and their families and make decisions that matters to them the most. Not to speak for them or to replace their voice, is to engage with them. Second, that we have to challenge ageism and it has to be explicitly addressed because still too often many health and care workforce still believe, in fact 65% of health and care workforce still believe that dementia is a normal part of the aging process. What this means is that many people are not diagnosed, let alone receive treatments and support. And when older persons are excluded or devalued because of age or cognitive decline, this is discriminations. And so challenging ageism has to be the key for the considerations of the convention. And finally, third is equity, not just equality, but equity must guide action. And this includes supporting caregivers, as we heard earlier from Monica. Equity recognizes that people face different reality. And because people face different reality, we need different form of support so that everyone can enjoy the same rights. And people with lived experience, especially women, and those with fewer resources encounter greater barriers to care and participations. And at the same time, most care are provided by family members, and most are women and older women who carry this emotional and heavy burden, financial burdens. And so supporting caregivers is part of supporting healthy aging. And I think Monica mentioned earlier, care is a shared responsibilities because we have to recognize that all of us are aging as well. So to consider this convention, we need to think about the dignity, the personhood, to challenge ageism and to promote equity in driving this change in narrative. So thank you.
Thank you, Yonggi. It's really helpful that you helped us have summarized and distill some of the discussions so far and your very own thoughts around what's very important. So thank you so much for that. Next, we'd like to introduce our final panelist, Titania Velasquez, who is the Deputy Ombudswoman at the Institution of Ombudswomen of the Republic of Croatia. Where she works to promote human rights and combat discrimination, particularly in healthcare and social welfare. She brings extensive experience collaborating with international bodies, including the United Nations, Council of Europe, and the EU Fundamental Rights Agency. Over to you.
Thank you all. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending where you are. And I have to say, listening to all of the speakers before me, much of what the experience of people living with dementia in Croatia has already been reflected in many of your interventions so far. So maybe just before I look at dementia and the principles behind it from the context in which we work, just to give you the idea, how do we learn about the challenges faced by people living with dementia? So most of our work is based on the complaints which we receive from older persons when they encounter human rights violations and their family members who are providing very often care to them. Also, we regularly visit long-term institutions where older persons live, and actually we do interviews both with older persons in long-term care institutions, but also with staff working in these institutions. And we regularly exchange with national, regional, and local authorities, as well as civil society organizations. So from our experience and from the context in which we work, we highlighted that dementia raises several issues about the needs and the rights of older people. And we always underline that one of the basic principles should be, as many of you already said, dignity, and that older persons should be able to live in dignity and security and be free of exploitation and physical or mental abuse. Another important aspect mentioned already by many of you is that generally there is a lack of understanding of dementia, and very often this causes fear about developing dementia and a lot of stigma around dementia. For those who have dementia, for their caregivers and their family members. And this can contribute to social isolation and to delays in seeking and receiving support and help. So I would underline non-discrimination and fight against ageism as extremely important principle, which the convention should reflect when thinking about the protection of rights of persons living with dementia. Another challenge which we have encountered very much in our work is the question of participation. So how much people living with dementia and their caregivers are provided space to participate in all the decisions which affect their lives and well-being, and whether they are provided space to formulate and recommend some of the solutions for the policies that affect their daily lives. And in this respect, what we see as a challenge is the equal access to community services and facilities. So whether they are able actually to access adequate food, education, healthcare, transport, public buildings, housing schemes, information, and communication. And also here, I would like to underline that when it comes to participation, accessibility of information and the support in empowering them to exercise the right to participation is an additional issue which should be kept in mind. Also, many of you have already underlined it so many times, and I think it's a key, is the autonomy and enabling the exercise of rights to participate and to decide for themselves. And what we do see in practice is that there aren't always safeguards in place to prevent all forms of abuses that violate free consent of older persons and their rights to make decisions about different aspects of their life, and lack of adequate schemes which would provide support when decision making, when older persons need support in making decisions, either by appointing a trusted third party or helping them with decisions and adopting safeguards in order to avoid abuses and challenges related to supported decision making. Finally, what I would like to say is that in order to provide meaningful life and independence, there is a need for a strong social protection system and communities and environment that are aware and are sensitive to older people. And in this respect, from our work, what we have seen are several challenges regarding to, on one hand, access to care, on the other hand, to the type of care which is available, and finally, on the quality of services provided. Very often, it is still institutionalization of care, which is a form of care provided for older persons with dementia. And here, sometimes the challenge may be the lack of guarantee of a free consent of such type of care. Additional challenge is the quality of care, because it varies very much depending on the resources the institutions have. And very often there is a lack of specialized care. And finally, as many of you have already spoken about it, so much of the care is provided by the families, and there needs to be the recognition of caregivers and support provided for caregivers, which very often are also, in our national context, women. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. That's a very fulsome overview of the human rights principle that matters, and it's really helpful to hear from a human rights expert such as yourself. So at this time, what I would like to do is to invite all panelists back to the floor, and what we're going to do is just do a little bit of a playback, and I think we might just dive into one particular principles and have maybe a short discussion around that. So as Osna help us bring everyone, all the panelists back on, what I would just kind of start playing back what I heard. So I think some of the key principles I heard includes autonomy, non-discrimination, safety, participation, non-presumption of capacity, personhood, dignity, equity, as well as quality, accessible health services and support. So I think those are the main ones that I heard. Might there be something that I missed that you share that, you know, we should really kind of pin it down? And we'll come to you participants too to get your thoughts, but I just wanted to see from the panelists, is there anything that I might have missed? Okay, so it looks like we're good so far. So maybe what I like to do is maybe dive into the discussion around personhood, because it came up in different formats and from different perspectives. So I really wanted for us to maybe dive a little bit deeper into, you know, in order to, what is the personhood principles that you see, and what do we need to kind of have in terms of interventions or practices to make that personhood principle come to life? Like you've shared, like from your different perspectives, but maybe we can just spend a few minutes on that. Anybody who's in the panel who would like to help us kick off? So this is at this point with the panel. Thank you.
May I share a bit of an example? Last year, I have this great privilege together with DY to participate in the Walk the Talk for Dementia, walking the El Camino, together with advocates, researchers, people with lived experience, and their caregivers. And along the journey, we met Bobby Redmond. She has been living with dementia, prefrontal temporal dementia, for 10 years. And she shared her experience why she wanted to do this walk the talk. And she is from Australia, which is a very long distance to Spain. And she shared that at the time she has lost most of her mobility. And so she can't really walk the El Camino, which is a 4 days walk. But she was so determined. And she talked to her healthcare providers that she wanted to do this walk because she wanted to raise the awareness. What Jim has said, to raise awareness is so important. So I think the example of personhood was that their caregivers didn't say, oh, you know what? It's such a long distance and you can't really walk. Maybe you shouldn't do that. They didn't do that. They said, yes, we will help you to get you ready to go for this walk. And slowly, to train, we talk about healthy aging, which is about building functional abilities, to do training so that, 5 minutes a day walking up the hill. And they did just that. And so in the end, she walked 10 kilometers out of 40 kilometers. And by her doing that, she really challenged stigma and challenged ageism. And I think this is personhood, to enable a person to do what really matters to them and really focusing on what is important.
That's really great. I think that's a very wonderful example to help bring to life what personhood means from an individual with dementia. Would any other of our panelists like to share your thoughts? Oh, Debanjan, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very powerful way to kind of establish personhood. I think again, since I work in clinical care, one of the thing I want to highlight here is that no two individuals with living with dementia are the same. It depends on the type, the problems that they're facing, the stage at which they're diagnosed, the caregiver support, where they're living, the present symptoms that they're having, etc. And that kind of decides that, what will be the enablement of the personhood. Now, one of the thing is, routinely, we often ask the person, and many times it's a very mechanical way. It's just about a consent form. How about we change that to conversations rather than just having a checklist of yes, 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 and then we consider that they have given consent? As basic as when somebody living with dementia participates in a research, let's say something in an imaging study or a qualitative study or an ethnographic study, whichever. But I have seen many times when their consent is taken, either it's by proxy or sometimes, it's a very different way of how, consent is established otherwise. So that's one thing. The other is when we assess risk routinely in our clinical practice. What about we try and incorporate these principles of personhood and dignity into the risk management? In that way, we can actually handhold the caregivers, not just keep them as a separate island in the care, but in routine assessments, in routine clinical risk assessment in community. A lot of our individuals get diagnosed in community. So we can actually involve and incorporate these principles of personhood into routine clinical care, not just keeping them as an isolated island somewhere, just exclusive, limited to research and policy documents. That would be my take. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you, Debanjan. Yeah, it's a very good point that each person is different as it is already. And then, so therefore, when we view that person or work with that person who has dementia, there's that added layer of individuality. So that's interesting. It makes me think about them with personhood. If we're to think about it as a principle, it's the principle then that we treat everyone, I guess it makes sense, like anyways, but treat everyone as an individual and as part of that principle. Anyone else in the panel would like to comment about personhood? Okay, so as you ponder that, I do have a question in the chat that someone said, one more thing I would like to mention here, as a person with dementia always prefers communication in his or her mother tongue. So it's sometimes very tough if a person, say a German person living in USA, would wish to speak a German language. So would any of the panelists like to comment about that in terms of the language or the mother tongue as part of that personhood?
Okay, I will talk.
Thank you, Emily.
Yeah. Well, actually, is that for most people with dementia, and once we live with dementia, our acquired languages, which is we acquire in the school, will definitely disappear, and it will fall back to our own mother tongue, the language we are brought up, that will retain with us. But unfortunately, is that I found if you want to access care, it will be mostly in the language. Like for example, I'll say in Singapore, it will be available in mostly in English, and then some is in Chinese. And now they are trying to cover other languages like Tamil also. But then you always have this issue of how about people who are migrants who come to your country and stay? Like for example, for me, people always say that Malaysia and Singapore are neighbors. They are almost exactly have the same culture. But that is not true. I don't come from Kuala Lumpur. My culture is from Sarawak. My hometown is very small, and so I don't have the same culture with my peers. So again, and the language that we talk, even though we might be talking the same dialect called Hokkien or whatever, it's different again. So that is when we talk about language, the preferred language, the people who work in the care system needs to be able have some basic knowledge about, okay, this person preferred language is what, and if I don't have that people, can I find someone to come in, and which is seriously every time is not accessible or not given. And that is why always, to me, having accessibility is not enough. We need to have equitable accommodations. Only then people living with dementia can really have good health and well-being. Yeah.
Thank you, Emily, from sharing from that very personal perspective as well as very, it speaks, I think, for most of us around the world where we have mixed cultures that we live in. Debanjan, you were going to make a comment?
Yeah, thanks, Margaret. I'll just make a very brief comment. Actually, I see one of the chat messages. That's actually from the secretary of our RC chapter in India. She mentions that personhood is about speaking to the person, not speaking about the person. So in that context, I just like to make a very brief comment, which is often underlooked. Sexual rights. And, I work in this area. So I must say that, to put it very simply, when I visit long-term cares or when I go to residential care facilities, and let's say if somebody is there with their partner or their spouse, I see the caregivers just barging inside the room. They never knock. We should assume that a person's desire for intimacy, to feel closeness, to be sexually active, it's not a blanket thing that it gets erased, with dementia. So it's very important that we consider sexual rights to intimacy, and rights to adequate sexual health also as a part of rights when we discuss this dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Debanjan. You just brought up another aspect of personhood. Jim, were you going to say something? I might have missed you.
I think for me, stigma is the foundation for so much. And it's sort of everywhere, but in order to acknowledge the person living with dementia as a person who has rights, there is that I don't know, need to accept dementia as a disease. There needs to be that, you need to get over that whole issue of you're vulnerable, or you need protection, or you can't go out now because you might get lost. And so I tend to go back to, we have to address the stigma to start moving forward with so many of these things, and personhood is certainly one.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jim. When you speak about stigma, I remember conversations with Monica and Emily, and we talked about in different parts of the world, unfortunately, stigma is very much a part of the dementia that we need to rally against in our efforts to make it equal for everyone. We have a question on the floor, so I just wanted to bring that question to us, and then after that, we'll move into the next segment of our program. Let's see, what's the question? So the question is, and I think it's more of a question to Tatjana, sorry. What kind of complaint mechanisms can be made accessible to person with dementia? I think you probably could help us with that in maybe a more general context. Thank you.
Thank you. So from our experience, it's quite, in our national context, a challenge. On the one hand, if it's a long-term care institutions, it's very often the complaint mechanisms are not quite clear. There is this perception, which also I would say goes back to the personhood, where even if a person has a complaint, then the answer very often doesn't come in a written formal form, but it's more like talking to their family member, not going directly to the person and so on, which we find quite challenging and not supporting actually older persons themselves. I would say here for sure, national human rights institutions in each of these countries might be well placed for complaints. But generally, I think there needs to be a higher degree of awareness that there needs to be a procedure and that there is a need to respond to the complaints which are raised by the older persons, and that you also respond to them and not necessarily to their family members or caregivers at the moment. And at the same time, there needs to be, I would say, also an avenue for caregivers to be able to formulate challenges they encounter while providing support to their family members, and how they can get the response. I think this is extremely important also for trust in the systems which are put in place to support older persons. Otherwise, you have a feeling that you are somehow dropped in these systems and then forgot, and that your opinion and your experience is not valued or is not taken up, or the system is not built upon the needs people have.
Thank you, Tatjana. I think what you brought up is that, there are likely national mechanisms that exist today already that we can all turn to. But I think what's interesting and very important about what you said is that there's opportunity perhaps to strengthen that. And as we look at the UN Convention for the Rights of Older Persons, the whole piece around obligations and accountability is where maybe we can really look at how to make the situations and issues be spoken back with the older person versus another party, make the older person the central piece of it. So at this point of the agenda, what we'd like to do is actually engage our participants. I realize that that we run a little bit behind time, so if folks are okay to stay on for about 15 minutes. So the first part is that we're going to run a poll. You've heard like the different principles that have been shared. What we'd like to do is get your feedback on, what are the most important principles from your point of view. I think that's the first part of the poll. And the second is really an open poll for you to type in any of the other thoughts that you have. So autonomy, non-discrimination, safety, okay. And then we need to correct number 5. Yeah. Dignity. Okay. And then dignity also from a certain cultural perspective that you went to about dignity. And then what Katrina mentioned, number 9, health services and support, effective health services and support. So yes, it's been at this time, as we kind of come near to a close, what I'd like to do is to sincerely thank all of you, our participants and our panelists, for joining us today and sharing your insights and experience and reflections. The discussion and input shared today will be carefully summarized and shared to help inform the drafting of the UN Convention on the Rights of Older Persons, including older persons with dementia. The principles you shared today and a dialogue really helped to give that a lot of depth. Thank you for that. I would also like to thank our 8 promotional sponsors and everyone who helped to spread the word about this rally. We actually had about 220 registrant for this session, and I know that some of them, because of time zone issues, cannot be here. What this shows is that there is really an interest on the human rights of older persons living with dementia, and that I think we started with about 82 people, now have had a chance to really experience what it means to contribute input toward the future convention. So in closing, I would like to invite all of you to call on your governments to actively participate in the drafting of the UN Convention, and for your governments to host national consultation that meaningfully engage older persons and civil society, that means you and me, to participate, to give input. This is essential to ensuring that the convention is grounded in lived experience. So please stay tuned for more from Age Noble and our partners as we continue working to mobilize and support gathering input toward a truly transformative convention for older persons. Thank you so much again for being part of Rally and for advancing equal voices, equal rights. Thank you so much.